My teacher once told me that violin playing is a good way to combat depression. And I agree with him. It seems, though, that it's not a guarantee in every case, sadly. Some violinists have struggled with addictions, and in the case of the violinist we're discussing today, depression was to grab him in its clutches and eventually choke him. Small of stature, but sumptuous of tone, Christian Ferras represented the best of the Franco-Belgian violin school. In the 1960s, he was the favoured violin soloist of Herbert von Karajan, and their recordings together sold by the thousands. Seemingly at the height of his career, he had a lot going for him. So what went wrong? Let's go back to the beginning. Christian Ferras was a French violinist born at Le Touquet on the 17th of June 1933. Ferras began studying the violin with his father Léon at 7. Léon was a hotelier and a good amateur fiddler who had studied with Marcel Chaillet. He attended the Conservatoire de Nice as a student of Charles Bistézy in 1941, and in 1943 obtained the first prize. Charles Bistézy was the solo violinist at the local opera and a César Thompson pupil. To enter the Conservatoire, Ferras had to play a Berlioz concerto which he memorised in a single week. In 1942 he made his debut with the Nice Orchestra, and in May 1943 was awarded first prize in violin. He graduated his performance of Saint-Saëns' third concerto, winning him the Premier Prix d'Excellence. And in October 1944 he went to the Conservatoire de Paris, where his teachers were René Benedetti for violin and Joseph Calvet for chamber music. In 1946 he took first prizes in both disciplines, violin and chamber music, and started his performing career with the Pas de Loup Orchestra under Albert Wolff, playing Lalo's Symphonie Espagnole, 4 movements only, and following it up a week later with the Beethoven Concerto. He also performed with Paul Paret. He worked with Romanian violinist and composer George Enescu, who also acted as an instructor. And he had lessons with the Russian émigré Boris Kamensky. The Violin Concerto by Federico Elizalde was premiered by Ginette Neveu in Paris on the 4th of November 1944. But Christian Ferras gave its London premiere under the direction of Gaston Poulet in the presence of the composer, and made the world premiere recording on the 7th of November 1947 at the age of 14. That day, on the 7th of November, they took the Elysade into the Decca studios and recorded it. He played Mozart's Turkish Concerto and the Elizalde Concerto, which he and Poulet had previously introduced in Paris. Ferras also played Bach's Double Concerto with his fellow Enescu devotee Yehudi Menuhin. Members of the orchestra were amused that the lad had to stand on a platform to bring himself up to the diminutive Menuhin's height. In 1948, Ferras won first prize at the International Scheveningen Festival. Yehudi Menuhin was among the judges. He premiered Arthur Honegger's Sonata for solo violin in the Salle Gaveau on the 16th of November 1948. The next year he won the second prize, the first prize was not awarded, in the International Marguerite Long Jacques Thibault competition. It was there that he met Pierre Barbizet, with whom he formed one of the most famous partnerships in the history of piano-violin collaboration. Let's digress for a moment to talk about the Franco-Belgian school of violin playing. This school of violin playing suffered something of a thin time in the post-war years. In Belgium, Alfred Dubois died in 1949, aged only 15, leaving his pupil Arthur Grumio on a lonely eminence. In France, air crashes claimed Ginette Neveu in 1949, aged 30, and Jacques Thibault in 1953, aged 72. Fine players such as Henri Merkel, René Benedetti, Davy Erly, Janine Andrade and Michel Leclerc made excellent careers but did not break through to international stardom. It was left to the old master Zino Francescatti and the young hopeful Christian Ferras to carve up the world between them. Francescatti was enormously popular in America, while Ferras ruled over Europe, but of course they ventured into each other's fiefdoms. let's go over some highlights of his career. In 1951, he was invited by Carl Böhm to play with the Berlin Philharmonic, and at that point his career began to take off. And he went on to give a series of concerts in, amongst other places, Japan and South America. In 1959, Ferras began to rise to real prominence. He began his career in the United States by playing Brahms' Concerto under Charles Munch. He recorded the Bach Double Concerto with Yehudi Menuhin and played at the Pradis Festival with Pablo Casals and Wilhelm Kempff. Ferras returned to the US in 1962, 63, 65, 67, 68, 70 and 74, usually playing recitals with Barbizet as well as concertos. In 1968, he performed at the General Assembly Hall for delegates and their guests at the United Nations. On 4th of February 1956, he played the Brahms Concerto in Vienna with a conductor who was to have a crucial influence on his career, Herbert von Karajan. And in 1963, Christian Ferras would describe playing Mozart's G major concerto for Pope John XXIII at the Vatican as one of the great experiences of his life. Christian Ferras also premiered a number of works, including Arthur Honegger's Sonata for Solo Violin in the Salle Gaveau on the 16th of November 1948. In 1952, he premiered both Claude Pascal's Violin Sonata, and he also premiered the Double Concerto by Ivan Semenov. And in 1954, he premiered Peter Racine-Fricker's Rhapsodia Concertante at the Cheltenham Festival in the UK on the 15th of July 1954, with John Pritchard conducting the Halle Orchestra. And although the Violin Concerto by Federico Elizalde was premiered by Ginette Neveu in France, he gave the premiere in the UK on the 7th of November 1947 at the age of 14. In 1959, he premiered Gyula Bando's Violin Concerto, and in 1960 he premiered Serge Nig's Concerto, which the composer is said to have written for the violin and not without the violin. Then he gave the premiere of his close friend Serge Nig's Concerto for solo violin at Carnegie Hall in 1968. Of course, these are modern 20th century works, not necessarily particularly famous ones that everyone's heard of, but nevertheless works that he did have the privilege to premiere. And then eventually difficulties caught up with Ferras. Early in 1975, having arrived in America to start a 2-month tour, he was taken to hospital with a reported heart attack. Having recovered from that year, he taught at the Paris Conservatoire. He needed his professor's salary as he had apparently run up gambling debts and had been forced to sell one of his Strads. He kept disappointing his London audience, and on 2 occasions was replaced by Ralph Holmes, who himself was to die tragically aged 47. And from difficulties to tragedy. On the 9th of March 1982, Ferras returned to the concert platform with a new pianist, Alain Lefebvre, claiming that working with Barbizet again would only remind him of his bad habits. Yet he and his old duo partner were reunited for a recital on the 6th of May. His final concert took place at Vichy on the 25th of August. Christian Ferras struggled with severe lifelong depression. He died by suicide in Paris on the 14th of September 1982, aged 49, jumping from the window of his Paris apartment. He put an end to the years of emotional torment that had caused his dazzling career to disintegrate. Le 14 septembre 1982, le grand violoniste français Christian Ferras, âgé de 49 ans, mettait fin à ses jours en se jetant dans le vide depuis l'appartement du 10e étage qu'il habitait à Paris au numéro 4 de la place de Barcelone. So that's the address where he died. The 10th floor of the apartment, number 4, Place de Barcelone. The instruments of Christian Ferras. For his early concerts and recordings, Ferras used violins by Max Milon and Violin. In 1954, Ferras acquired a Stradivari violin, Le Président of 1721, from luthier Etienne Vatelot. In 1966, Ferras was doing well enough to buy his second Strad, the Dragonetti Milanola of 1728. And his favoured bows were by Dominique Peccat, Houchard and Sartoy. And some awards and honours. Ferras's 1965 Deutsche Grammophon recording of the Sibelius Violin Concerto with Herbert von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic won both the Grand Prix du Disque and the Edison Prize. And in 1975, he was awarded recognition by the Conservatoire de Paris for his works. Let's go through the chronology then. In 1933, he was born in Le Touquet on the 17th of June. In 1942, gave his first solo performance with the orchestra in Nice. And from 1941 to 1946, studies at the Nice and Paris conservatoires. In 1944 to 1946, he studied in the Paris Conservatoire with René Benedetti. In 1946, makes his Paris debut playing Lalo's Symphonie Espagnole. In 1947, studied with George Enescu and made his first recording. In 1948, he won the joint first prize in the Scheveningen International Competition. In 1949, he won the second prize at the Longue Thibaut competition. There was no first prize. In 1951, he made his first tour of Germany and performed the Beethoven Violin Concerto with the Berliner Philharmoniker with Karl Böhm. In 1954, recorded the Brahms Violin Concerto with the Wiener Philharmoniker under Karl Schuricht. In 1959, he began his first US tour. He also recorded the Bach Double with Menuhin for EMI and met Pablo Casals and Wilhelm Kempf at the Prades Festival. In 1963, he made a much acclaimed recording of the Brahms Double Concerto with Pierre Fournier under Herbert von Karajan. 1964-7 made concerto recordings with Karajan. In 1966 acquired the Milanola Stradivarius of 1728, an instrument once played by Paganini. In the 1970s, Ferras's exhausting schedule takes its toll when he starts to suffer from alcohol problems, leading to a reduction in his concert activities and deteriorating health. In 1974, he gave a concert with Barbizet to mark the 25th anniversary of their partnership. From 1975 to 1982, he was professor at the Paris Conservatoire. In 1982, after a lengthy break, he gives a handful of concerts, but the last of them on the 25th of August, only weeks before his death. On the 14th of September 1982, tragically, Ferras took his own life. So in conclusion, Christian Ferras was an idiosyncratic French virtuoso whose long battle with inner demons had a tragic conclusion. Ferras was a formidable natural talent and a highly imaginative virtuoso who had limpid elegance and fire, sensuousness and raw visceral force. His ascent to fame had been a seamless transition from child prodigy to mature artist. For most of the 1950s and 60s, he was one of the world's preeminent violinists. Yet, as he reached this zenith, an insidious dependency on alcohol gnawed at him. Bouts of depression intensified and he became an increasingly fallible performer. He taught at the Paris Conservatoire from 1975, but his last few years were a terrible struggle with his inner demons, punctuated by occasional short-lived comebacks. Studio and live recordings have re-established his stature as a supreme violinist with a uniquely moving voice. An intensely lyrical player, he could make his violin sigh and weep, but his sound also had a luminous quality in the best tradition of French refinement. His vibrato has been described as somewhat highly strung, which for a violinist is somewhat of a pun.